Okay, this is ENT 384 and it's January 20th, 2022, and we'll get started here. Okay, so today what we're going to talk about is I want to talk a little bit about just your part one of your term assignment, and essentially it's to write up a business, a fictional business, or if you want to do a real business, that's fine too. And essentially what I want you to do as part of that is I want you to describe your business, what kind of business it's going to be, what your marketing and your demographic and your product or services are going to be. I want you to talk about what type of organizational structure you're going to use, be it an LLC or an S Corp or a C Corp or a partnership or sole proprietorship. And I want you to tell me why you use that particular structure. I'm going to go into the pros and cons of them next week, the different structures. We'll go into LLCs and that kind of thing next week. But for today, I want to show you the documents that I want you to include with your project that are the documents that you would do in the real world if you were going to start an LLC or a corporation or a partnership or whatever. And I want to show you how to do those, where to find them. I do have all those in my book here. And also I'm going to show you how to find them in the real world online, just like I would do as a lawyer when I'm setting up a business for somebody. These are basically the steps that I go through in the real world. Okay, so this is what you would do if you wanted to start a business in the real world. Just as a reminder, when you fill the documents out, you can either take them right out of this book, and you can fill them out by hand. That's fine with me. If you want to go online and print them out, they're going to look nicer. Plus, it gives you some experience in doing it online. I won't grade you any differently if you fill it out by hand or type it up. That's totally up to you. So I do have all these forms in my yellow book, but I will tell you some of them are a little bit out of date because they update the forms online about every few months. So that doesn't matter for this class, but in the real world it might. So if you're going to do it in the real world, you want to definitely use the forms that are online because they're the most up-to-date ones. So let's talk about the forms I want you to fill out. And so that's going to be on page 4 of the yellow book. So I have this broken down, and a lot of these are going to be the same for each different format. But I have them broken down first into LLC, so that's limited liability company, which nowadays is pretty much the most common form of business that I see most small business people do, either as a single person LLC or as a multi-member LLC, like a partnership type. So that's why I start with it at the top. Number 2 is a corporation, and these are the forms I want you to fill out if you're going to be a corporation. And this is true for either an S corporation or a C corporation. And don't worry about the difference between the two. We'll talk about that in a different class and the benefits, pros and cons of S versus C. And at the bottom here, I have limited partnership, which very few people do anymore. But these are the steps for filling out a limited partnership. The steps are all kind of the same, it's just the forms are slightly different for each different type of structure. So I have the page numbers here where you find all these forms out of the yellow book. You feel free, if you want to snap a picture of it with your phone, I don't mind that whatsoever. Or if you want to come up after class and take a picture of my page, that's fine too. I have a lot of students do that all the time. If you're in my other class, BA 230, you're welcome to do it there too. So, all right, so let's just start at the top here. So the first thing you're going to do to start a business is decide on which structure you want to use. And again, we'll go into that in a different class. But let's just say, first of all, we're going to be an LLC. And this is true for the other structures as well. So the first thing you're going to do is file the correct form with the Oregon Secretary of State. And that will be, if you're in other states and other jurisdictions, that will be true pretty much in every state. Every state has their own little unique things. Let me make sure I'm recording here. Hold on. Yeah, we're good. Okay. So Oregon Secretary of State, for an LLC, the form is called Articles of Organization. And then for a corporation, it's called Articles of Incorporation. And they look kind of the same. So the LLC form is on page 24. I'm just going to put this up here, but I'm going to go online. I'm going to show you where you find it in the real world. So the Oregon Secretary of State Corporation Division, which is, let me switch over to my computer here real quick. If I can get it to work. Okay, wait, stop. All right, so I'll leave the form on over there, and we'll have the web page here. All right, so the Oregon Secretary of State Corporation Division is sort of the central hub for starting a business, keeping a business up to date and active. It's also a place where, even if you're not starting a business, there's a lot of information that you'll use in the real world that you can look up on the Secretary of State's website. So I just kind of want to play around with a little bit and show you what's there, which includes the forms that you would file to start the business. So they have different parts of the Secretary of State, different functions, voting, archives, and audits. The business link here is the one that you want to go to. So they have various services here. So the first thing we're going to do is right here, you got to look up and see if the name that you want to use, you got to come up with a name. And you want to make sure that name is available. That's the first thing you're going to do before you fill out any forms whatsoever, because you can't reuse a name, at least most of the time. Sometimes you can, but usually you can't. So that's the first step I'm going to take, is to look up to see if the name's available. So I'll put that on over there too. All right, so this is the search business name. So you type in the name of the business name that you want to use. So for example, let's say I want to start a business called Nike. I'm sure nobody's used that before. Who would name their business Nike? All right, so I look there. This is going to show me every filing in the state of Oregon that involves the word Nike, right? Nike. And that way I can tell if that name is available. So that's the first step. Look up the name. If the name has been used, you can't use it again. And that's true if you're an LLC versus a corporation. So if I wanted to set up Nike LLC, there's already a Nike Incorporated here on the bottom, right here. So I can't use that name because it's already been used, even though it's corporation versus LLC, that name's already been used. And there are various reasons why you can't reuse a name. Number one, of course, it's already been filed, but two, there's patent and trademark implications. We'll talk about U.S. patent and trademark searches later on in the term, because you also want to make sure that the name has not been trademarked or copyrighted. But for purposes of setting up the organization, that's the first thing you're going to do. Look up the name that you want to use, make sure that it is available. Now sometimes, like if you look right here, Nike Tempo LLC, which is INA, which is inactive. This is a foreign limited liability company. So sometimes if the name has been used in the past and it's not, how do I say this, a multi-state business like Nike Incorporated worldwide. So if you like a restaurant name or something that's been used in another state but it's not in Oregon, you can maybe reuse that name. It's not really a good idea. I usually tell people to come up with a name that's slightly different. That way you don't have to get into a trademark problem with people. But let's keep it simple for today. We're going to just start with looking up the name. Now there's other information I want you to be aware of that you can get off this site. So I'm going to click on, here at the bottom, Nike Incorporated, which you're all familiar with. This is the Nike we all know here in Oregon. So Nike Incorporated. So there's a lot of information on here that goes just beyond the information that you would use to set up your business. Once you're in business, you may have a need to look up other businesses for various reasons. As a lawyer, for example, if I'm going to send legal papers to a business, or I'm going to sue them on behalf of my client, I'm going to look up who is authorized to accept legal paperwork on behalf of the business. So we're going to start right here with this term, registered agent. Right here. So a registered agent is the person, or it could be an entity, so in this case it's United Agent Group Incorporated, that has the legal authority to accept lawsuits and other legal paperwork on behalf of an entity. So if you're an LLC, limited liability company, if you're a corporation, either a C Corp or an S Corp, you're a partnership, you're a nonprofit, you are any type of a business entity, you have to have a registered agent. So that way, and it has to be published, and that way the public knows, which include government entities, this is where they'll send tax liens and that kind of thing too. Any type of legal communication that needs to go to that entity can be served upon the registered agent, and that is the same as serving the entity itself. So if I'm filing a lawsuit against Nike, I'm going to send my process server out and serve the paperwork to this company here in Portland, United Agent Group. And so literally, we're going to go to their door, knock on the door, and hand them the papers. If I'm sending mail, I'll send it certified mail, return receipt requested to them. So if I'm going to make, a warranty claim or whatever it may be, that's who I'm going to serve. Now for you guys, when you're setting up your business, you also have to have a registered agent. It can be you. You can be your own registered agent. So if you're going to be an LLC or a corporation, you can be a registered agent. That's fine. And a lot of people do that. That's just fine. The downside to being your own registered agent is if you are sued, there is the possibility you might get a knock on the door at the middle of the night with the sheriff's deputy to hand you the lawsuit papers, or that kind of thing. There are lots of registered agent companies that do that. Lawyers also do that for their clients. I act as a registered agent for my clients in my law practice, although I'm kind of phasing that out. So the registered agent is the person or entity that has the legal authority to accept that paperwork. So when you look on, I'm going to switch back over to the form real quick here. Come on, there we go. Oh boy, all right. So when I file with the Secretary of State this form to start an LLC, down here it's got the registered agent. That's where I'm going to put that information. That'll be the same on a corporation or a partnership. That's where you put your registered agent. Now here's something to know about a registered agent. You have to have a physical, that's on page 24 of the envelope. You have to have a physical street address. You cannot use a P.O. box or like a Mailboxes R Us or a UPS type store. The Secretary of State won't accept that, and they actually do cross-check those addresses and they'll reject it. So you have to have a physical address. It can't just be a virtual one. You can have a different mailing address, that's fine, but you still have to have a physical address. So registered agent, you have to have that for your own entity, and again, that could be yourself, and then put that address. In the real world, that's what you would look up to find out, how to serve legal papers on companies. All right, so let's look at where you go after you've decided, okay, I found the name I want to use. It is available. I'm going to click back here. So I'm going to start all over again here and just say, okay, let's start a company. I'm going to look up the name. Let's call it Goomba. No idea if there's a Goomba, but There actually is. All right, so let's say I want to call my company Goomba LLC. So here I see Goomba Guys LLC and Goombas, plural, LLC. That's going to be a close one. I don't know, the Secretary of State would probably reject just Goomba without the S because it's too close. But so that's one thing the Secretary of State will look at to make sure the name is available. They do have another search where they'll tell you, they'll give you a preliminary decision on the name. Go back and find that for you here. Well, it's on a different page. But so, at any rate, let's say I'm going to use the word Goomba. So now I've got to fill out the correct form if I want to set up an LLC. So here is where you'll find that form, and again, this is the form that's on page 24 of your book. And this will depend upon which type of entity you're going to use. So to register the business in the real world, I don't want you to do that in this class, because you'll actually start a business, unless you want to. I mean, that's fine. I've had a lot of students start businesses out of this class. But you're going to go here. So if you want to do it online, you can fill it out online, and then it will submit electronically. That is the fastest way to do it. You can also do it hard copy, where you fill out the form, print it out, and send it in either by fax or US mail. But that's much slower. I filed, especially in December. A lot of filings get done in December for year end. Last I looked, it was taking about, well, it tells you right here, I think. So yeah, it tells you right here, waiting times. So right now, if I file online, it's going to be a 5-hour wait to get your business registered. So that's pretty quick. If I fax it or email it, they're 16 days behind right now. They're way understaffed with COVID and everything else going on. So if you want it done quickly, do it online. Some types of business entities you cannot do online, like a professional corporation if you're a doctor or a dentist or something. You have to do that in writing, so just be aware of that. Now for you guys, that's not really relevant, but in the real world, just be aware of that. So if you want to do the actual hard copy form like I have in my book, the form is available under business forms here. And this is where you're going to find various different forms that you will use to register a business. So first we have assume business name, abbreviated ABN. This is sometimes referred to as a DBA. You may have heard that before, a DBA, doing business as. In Oregon, we call it assume business name. And we'll talk more about those later, but that's basically when you're using a different name than your legal name. So my name is John Hasbrook, so if I wanted to have a hot dog stand and call it John Hasbrook's Hot Dogs, I don't need to do it assume business name, I can just use my name. But if I'm a corporation or something and I want to use a different name, like Super Good Hot Dogs, then I'll have to register that assume business name. And I'll talk more about those later. I want to kind of stick with the forms today that you'll need to file. And by the way, for some of you that just came in, on page 4 of my book, page 4 of the book, this is where I have a list of what forms I want you to fill out and submit. LLC, you don't have to do all of them. It just depends on which structure you're going to do. So if you're going to do an LLC, you do A through F. If you're going to be a corporation, you do those. You don't have to do LLC and corporation. All right? I had a student once that did every one of them for all 3 forming. They learned a lot, but they didn't need to. It was above and beyond what they needed to do. So right now we're talking about this form, Articles of Organization, which is on page 24. All right, so here's where we'll find that on the computer, Oregon Business Registration Form, and that's where we're going to find if we're going to be a corporation, a business corporation, nonprofit corporation, a professional corporation, that's what I am. I'm a professional corporation in my law practice. So a lawyer, a doctor, a dentist, real estate agent, an architect, other professional licensees. If you're going to be a corporation, you'd be a professional corporation. And then here's where we find LLCs and limited partnerships. Now, I'll just talk real quick about foreign business forms, just real quick. If you are an entity, such as a corporation or an LLC, that's organized in another state or outside the U.S., then you have to register in Oregon. If you're doing business in Oregon, if you have employees doing work here, you have to register as a foreign business. And that could be either internationally, or if you're incorporated in Idaho or whatever. If you don't register as a foreign entity, then you're not legally doing business in Oregon, you can be fined. So let's go down to LLC. And here's where we're going to find the Articles of Organization form. And again, in the real world, you can register online, or you can do the print form, which is the form I have on page 24. And I'm just going to click on that real quick. And again, for this class, please don't register online unless you actually want to start the business, which is fine. However, if you do intend to start a real business as your project, please do not include in the printed materials you provide me with your actual real world information, like your social security number, date of birth. I don't want that personal information, so either delete it out or put in a fake number like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever. I don't really want your home addresses or anything either. When I'm grading your project, I'm looking at, did you fill out the form? I'm not going to go through every little check the box, and I look at the form. If it's generally filled out good, yes, I move on to the next one. So I'll just throw that out there ahead of time. So here is the print form version. And in the real world, I will tell you that even if I'm going to register online for a client of mine, I will also do a print form and have my client sign it. And I do that for two reasons. Number one, that way my client approves what I'm going to be typing into the computer, and I've got it written and signed by them. That way, if later they say, oh, I didn't want it that way, I'm like, well, here it is. And then part two is oftentimes banks or other entities will want to see the hard copy form in the real world, like when you open a checking account. So I always do both. Even if I'm registering it fully online, you don't need to do a hard copy form, but I like to do it anyway, just as a matter of, it's especially if you're doing business out of state, they want to see a hard copy form, so I do it no matter what. Now, so if you want to, you can fill the form out online. And you see here there's a bunch of different boxes, and you can hit print form. And then it will print out the form with information. So when you're filling out this form, let me blow it up so it's easier to read. And this is going to be true of both corporations and LLCs. A lot of the information will be the same for both. It's just one's a corporation, one's an LLC. So this is the Llc Articles of Organization, right here at the top. And first you're going to put your name in, and you'll notice here, so this is what I'm going to call my LLC. You have to have the words LLC, Limited Liability Company, or the abbreviations LLC, or L period, L period, C period. You have to include that in your business name. If you're a corporation, you have to say Incorporated or Inc., or you can say Company or CO, or you can use the phrase Limited or LMTD. You have to include that in your name. If you don't, they'll reject it. That also is true in any marketing materials that you're using. You have to include your entity type. Technically, you can be fined if you don't. There are some ways around that, which I'll try to get into later in a different class. But for this one right here, I just want to go through this form. So name of the company, duration, perpetual, or when it will dissolve automatically. I will typically use perpetual. That means it will last until you dissolve it on your own, or if you don't renew it, the Secretary of State, after like 6 months, will automatically dissolve it if you don't pay your annual fee. Physical office, where it's actually physically going to be located, registered agent, physical address for registered agent. Then over here on the side, benefit company. This is what's called a public benefit company, which is a fairly new thing in Oregon. That means it's not simply, it's still for profit, but that's not the primary purpose. It's not a nonprofit, it's sort of in between. They're not very, very common. Indemnification, that's a little box you can check. I'll check it here so I can show you what I mean. All right, that's very important, especially in the real world. This means that the LLC will provide a liability shield, and in the event of a lawsuit or debt, the LLC will be responsible for that lawsuit or debt. And that way, if there's a lawsuit, the LLC provides a shield. We'll talk more about limited liability next week when we get into the pros and cons of the different entities. But this is where you indicate that you do want to have liability protection. Name of each person who's organizing the business, a list of the members, which are the owners of the business. If you're going to be a manager, managed LLC, you have to list the name of the manager, and I'll talk about the difference between over here. How will this limited liability company be managed? Either member managed or manager managed. Member managed means the owners vote. Manager managed means there's a manager. So like think of an apartment building where you've got the manager and then all the owners, they don't really want to be involved. They just want their monthly check. So you have a manager. And we'll talk about that more. I'll get into that structure stuff next couple weeks. So individual direct knowledge, that's basically the same as the person who's organizing it. That's a fairly new requirement. And then you have to sign it. So pretty straightforward, right? So this is the first form that I want you to include in your project, your write-up. If you're going to be a corporation, it's basically the same form with the same basic information. And so I want you to fill out that form. Either you can do it online and print it, or you can fill it out, pull it right out of my book and fill it out in handwriting, whichever. But just make sure that's the first form that you're going to include. So let's go back and I'll show you the corporate form, which is on page 23 of my book. So if you're going to be a business corporation, again, you can file online, Articles of Incorporation, or do the print form. And these are some other forms that involve the corporation. If you're going to amend the Articles of Incorporation, if you're going to totally redo them, that's called restated. Articles of Dissolution, if you want to shut the corporation down, that's the form that you would file. If you were going to merge two companies together, Articles of Merger, and on down the line. Those are, a lot of people use those. But so the one I want you to do is this Articles of Incorporation, and that's the form, just like the LLC form we looked at. And again, you can fill it out, business corporation, and then name of the company on down the line. So here's where it says business corporation must contain the word corporation, company, incorporated, limited, or an abbreviation. Okay, so that LLC corporation, that's the first step. File with Secretary of State. The Secretary of State will then issue a registry number. That is the number that the state assigns to your business. That's one of many numbers that you get when you start a business, the registry number. All right, so let's go back to page 4 of my book real fast. Okay, so first form for an LLC, Articles of Organization. Down here for a corporation. Same idea, Articles of Incorporation, just depending which one. And the Articles of Incorporation, just so you know, are the same if you're a C Corp or an S Corp. And we'll go into the differences between the two in a different class. But all corporations, S Corp, C Corp, file that same form. So you're not going to have a separate form for each type. Okay, so the next thing you're going to do, and actually I got these a little bit out of order, that's why I put 1 and 2. So number 2, the second thing I do to start a business, first I file with the Secretary of State. The next step is you're going to file what's called an SS4 with the Internal Revenue Service to obtain what's called an EIN, which stands for Employee Identification Number, which is also known as a tax identification number. And that's the number that the Internal Revenue Service will give to a business for tax filing purposes. It's sort of like a social security number for a business, in a way. So EIN, TIN, employer ID number, tax identification number, same thing. So sometimes you'll see that, a bank will ask you, what's your EIN or your TIN? They're the same thing, okay? So this form is available on page 31 of our book, or better yet, go to the IRS website. So for your project, I want you to fill out this form. I'll show you what it looks like here. So it's a form SS4, just so you know, SS stands for Social Security, Form 4. That's who administers the form. But you actually would fill that out on the IRS website, which I'll show you in a moment. So basically, for you guys, I want you to fill this form out. You can either do it online and print it, or you can just take it out of my book, like I say. And it's pretty straightforward. You know, what's the name of the business? What's the mailing address? What's the street address? County where it's located? Who's the responsible person? What is their social security number, individual tax identification number, or EIN? Again, don't use your real number there. And then what type of business structure is it? Pretty straightforward. If it's an LLC, how many members are you going to have? And just fill this out the best you can. This is what I was talking about. I'm not going to go through and say, oh, you missed box 9A part here. I don't get that detailed when I grade, okay? I just make sure you got it filled out pretty much how you should. And so just fill it out as best you can. If there's some part you don't know or whatever, send me an email or call me. But I don't get that picky for this class. And then, you know, when you're going to hire employees, when was your business started, closing month of your accounting year, which will usually be December, unless you're using a fiscal year that's different, like if you're a farmer, that goes September through August, the end of August for your crop year. I know there's a lot of detail I'm going over, but just fill this out as best you can. Down below, it's going to ask you what kind of business is it, just in general, you know, real estate, finance, healthcare. And then down here, I just want to show you something. Third-party designee. For those of you that may end up being an accountant or a lawyer, for that matter, or other type of bookkeeper or business type services, you may be filing this form on behalf of your clients, like what I do in my law practice. And so if you're going to do that, you have to put your name and your address and information here as a third-party designee. Otherwise, the IRS won't talk to you, nor will you be able to file on behalf of your client. So in the real world, if you're going to be doing this for other people, That's where you list your name, and then this person who's starting the business will sign down here. Now, let me show you how it looks online. Okay, so if you want to get the actual hard copy form that I was just showing you, and you want to fill that out online, the easiest thing to do is just go up here to the search function, do SS-4, and there is the form that you can then fill out and print if you want to do it that way. Again, in the real world, what I do is I fill out the SS4 form hard copy. As a third-party designee, I am required to have a hard signed copy in my file. Even if I'm filing it online, I still have to have a hard copy. Now, the hard copy can be digitally signed and PDF format and just saved on my computer. That's fine. I print it out because I'm a hard copy kind of person, in case you haven't noticed yet. But if you're doing this for your customers, make sure you have a hard copy, because I have had the IRS asking for that before. And it's actually potentially criminal if you don't, if you're an accountant or a lawyer or a bookkeeper or whatever. Now for you, if you want to fill this out and print it out, great. If you just want to do it out of the book, that's fine, but I definitely want you to have a hard copy. In the real world, you can file this online. I'll show you where. Go up here to File, down here to Business, and right there it says Employer Identification Number. Click on that, and that's going to start a form right here. Apply for an EIN online. Do not do that in this class. As soon as you click on that button, it generates a real-world form with the IRS. In the real world, if you wanted to do this on your own, or if you're doing this for a client, click on that, and it's going to basically lead you step by step through the SS4 form. Fill out the information, and then you hit Submit, and it will eventually get to the end of the form, and it will give you the tax identification number online. It takes about 20 minutes to fill it out, or more or less, depending on how fast you type. I will tell you right now, if you're doing this in the real world, when you get to the end and you hit the Submit button, it's the number, the tax identification number will come up on your screen. As soon as that happens, print it and then take a screenshot and save it as a PDF to your hard drive. Don't go on to the next page, because you can't go backwards. Once, I've done this before. I was setting up a business for a client, I got the number, and I just had a reflex hit Next button, and I didn't write the number down or take a picture or print it, and I couldn't go back, so I had to wait for 2 weeks for them to send a letter. So, yeah, it's kind of a pain. So that's, for you guys, you're not going to do that in this class. Don't do that, because it will actually give you a number, and IRS will not be happy. But if you're going to do that in the real world, when you get to the end and it shows you the screen, what I do is I print it, hard copy, I do a PDF to my hard drive, and I also take a picture of it with my iPhone. Because you want to have that number. You have to have that number to open a bank account. And you don't want to have to wait for it. And there's no really easy way to look it up otherwise. Yeah, question, go ahead.
Yeah, so for our project, if our makeshift fictional company doesn't have employees, do you want us to fill out this form still, or do you want us to choose a business that will need us to fill out this form?
You're going to have to fill the SS4 form out whether you have employees or not.
For the EIN.
For the EIN,
okay.
Yeah. It's
okay.
EIN-TN. That's why I mean they're interchangeable. So
okay.
even if you don't have employees, you still have to have that number.
Okay.
Because when you file your tax returns for the business, that's the number you use. When you go to open a bank account, that's the first thing the bank's going to ask for is the Secretary of State form and that form.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So, and that's why it's kind of misleading when they say EIN.
Uh-huh.
Even if you don't have employees, you still have to get that number. Now there's another number from Oregon, which is called a BIN, Business Identification Number, which we're getting to. And that, you only need that if you're gonna have employees.
Okay.
But this one you need no matter what.
All right,
Yeah.
thank you for that clarification.
Well, I take that back. There is one circumstance where you don't need it. And that's if you're a single member LLC with no employees, you can use your social security number, but I don't recommend that because that's the number that you put on all your 1099 forms. That's the number that you put on all of your business activity, and you don't really want your social security number floating around.
And this is different from the tax ID number, right?
Same thing.
Oh, it is the same thing?
Yeah,
Okay.
SS4 is the same. That's what I mean. The EIN and the TIN, tax identification, it's the same.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I don't, why they call it EIN versus TIN, I don't know. But it's the same thing. So the SS4 form, and like what this, if you're doing it online, this is for both the EIN and a TIN.
Okay.
It's interchangeable. It's like, you know, if I'm a nonprofit, or I do a lot of post-death probate work, when people die, and you have to get a tax ID number for the estate, same form. Yeah. That's kind of weird, but that's how it is. That was a great question, by the way, thank you. All right, lost my train of thought. Okay, so back to page 4 of our book. Why it takes so long to load. Okay, so SS4, EIN, TIN for the LLC, and again, if you're going to be a corporation, you will also do that same form to get your tax ID number. If you're a partnership, same form, all of them. All right, so the next document that, and forms I'm going to have you fill out for an LLC is the operating agreement. For a corporation, it will be the bylaws down here. Get this. So bylaws for a corporation, operating agreement for a limited liability company. So these are basically the constitution of the business. So in an LLC, you have 2 different types of operating agreements. If you're a one-person LLC, which we call a single member LLC, or if you have 2 or more members, it's called a multi-member LLC. For a corporation, it doesn't matter if you only have 1 shareholder, or 50 shareholders, or 1 million shareholders, it's bylaws. So I have these forms in my yellow book. So for an operating agreement for the LLC, it's on page 37. And I have these also available on our Canvas page in a RTF format, which will open in Word or WordPerfect or Google Docs, hopefully. If you have a problem opening it, just let me know and I can email it to you. So you choose which way you want to do it. Again, you can just rip them out of the book here, or you can go on and fill them out yourself. These are forms that I actually use in my own law practice. I modify them pretty much every time, however, but just gives you a general idea so you can see what they look like. So if you're a one-person LLC, single member LLC, this is the form of the operating agreement that you would use. And basically the purpose of an operating agreement, I'm not going to go through every paragraph, but the purpose of the operating agreement is to set up the structure of the limited liability company like bylaws do in a corporation. So this is going to say what members you have. If you're more than 1 member, you're going to use the form on page 42, if I remember. Yeah, page 42. So this is for focus. This is for more than 1 member. So this would be the name of the owners, the members, and what their percentages are. And this one, it was person was 89%, the other owner was 11%. And again, I have this on our Canvas page in a Word format. So basically the purpose of the operating agreement is to organize how the LLC is set up, to set forth what authority each member has. If you're going to have a manager, it will set forth what authority the manager has in terms of check writing, opening credit cards, bank accounts, getting loans, selling assets, buying real estate. It will talk about what happens when one of the owners dies, their ownership interest, who does it transfer to. It will talk about when you're going to have a meeting, voting rights, banking, who is an authorized person to open a checking account. So the LLC formational document is the operating agreement. Now again, a bank is going to require a copy of that. Oftentimes a bank will allow you to open a checking account without it because sometimes it takes a while to get it set up. But eventually you're going to have to provide a copy of it to your bank so the bank knows who has the authority. Same thing if you're doing a loan or a credit card, you're going to have to provide a copy to the bank or the lending institution. So just again, I want you to fill that out as best you can. I'm not going to go through every single paragraph, it would take a while. But you know, registered agent, the purpose, the type of business, and on down the line. If you're going through those and you have any questions about the operating agreement for an LLC, there are two different types. One person LLC, more than one person. There are two different types of operating agreements because the single member is much simpler. With a multi-member where you got more than one owner, you have to have a lot more detail because you're voting and doing that kind of thing. Or if it's just you, right, it's not as detailed. Now for a corporation, it's bylaws, which are about out of time here. So, page 52. And again, same general purpose is to set up the organizational structure for the corporation, minutes, who are the officers of the corporation, president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, that kind of thing. We'll talk more about those as we work our way through the term. Okay, that's about it for today. So let me shoot